It's Delia. That's me.
Hey Delia Boppers, what's up? So today, since my roommate's Epiphone Les Paul Standard is in desperate need of restringing, and because someone at Lambda Coalition once asked me if I would teach them how to play guitar, I'm going to be showing you how to change the strings on a guitar with the Tune-O-Matic Stopbar Bridge. The Tune-O-Matic Stopbar Tailpiece Bridge is just kind of the standard bridge used for Epiphone and Gibson guitars like the Les Paul. It's used for its improved sustain, or ability to let a note ring out when you're playing it, which along with the warm, rich, dark tone provided by the dual coil humbucking pickups is one of the defining characteristics and biggest selling points of Epiphone and Gibson guitars like the Les Paul. Now, the type of bridge you have on a guitar affects the way that you restring a guitar because of the fact that the strings actually have to go through it. In this case, when we remove the strings, this part is actually going to come completely off of the guitar. But in order for that to happen, we're actually going to have to unwind all the strings and get them off of here. This lady's already lost her G string, as you can see there in combat. Kind of a sexy string to lose if you're gonna lose the string. So that's gonna make my job easier because that's one less string I have to take off. So I have a peg winder for this, which is gonna make things go much faster. I recommend changing your strings about once every month or two, and these are like super cheap and you can get them at basically any music store, so you should definitely invest in one. Makes it super easy. I can just take the E string here and put it on the tuning peg and very quickly get it detuned and nice and slack there and ready to pull off of the peg. Just like this. Sometimes having pliers makes this easier. There we go. And then I'm gonna unwind the high E on the opposite side of the guitar. And then from there, I'm just gonna grab the A string, the B string, and the D string in sequence. Normally the G string would be the last string to come off, but like in this case, I guess this lady just decided that like she wanted to get this party started. This one is wrapped around there so many times. He never clipped the strings, so I'm having to like watch out every time this one goes by. Oh fuck. Yeah, this one's wrapped backwards. This one's actually messing me up because it was also wrapped backwards. Never wrap your strings clockwise, always wrap them counterclockwise, so you can unwrap them clockwise. The string should always approach from the center of the neck as opposed to like coming around and looping here. That's points off for whoever strung this guitar last time. I blame my roommate, but I don't think he actually knows how to string a guitar, which is why I'm stringing this. So it probably wasn't my roommate, but whoever it was, that's incredibly poor form. Stomach just growled so loudly. I got hungry in the middle of making this video, so I'm eating a Reuben on a bagel. You should always eat if you get hungry in the middle of restringing your guitar. So now that we've got the strings out of the pegs on the headstock of the guitar, we're going to go ahead and remove them from the bead end of the string, so-called because of this little bead at the end right here. And as we do this, these are the only things actually holding the bridge on there, so it's going to come off just like that. Okay, so don't freak out. This is perfectly normal. This is part of the process. This is supposed to happen. Since the strings are going to be a little bit kinked up at the top, it's going to be a little bit difficult to just like pull them through there, so I'm going to use the nice nifty wire cutters that are built into our nice little needle nose jewelry making pliers here, and use that to just snip the strings so that we have a nice straight end to pull out for each string, as opposed to like, you know, a weird, obnoxiously curly end that would be difficult to pull out through that straight hole that goes through that large piece of metal there. The B string is just unusually tough. It's the B string because it's the beastly string. There's actually absolutely nothing beastly about this string. It just helps to be using, you know, the appropriate place on the wire cutters. So the cool thing about the strings once you have them out is you can actually use them to make bracelets. I might just have to make a video on that. Now that you've got the strings off, this is the perfect time to dust your guitar, which this guitar is in desperate need of. You can polish your guitar if you want to as well. They make special polishes specifically for that. Should I mention that I'm literally just going to dust it off with my scarf? This guitar was in desperate need of cleaning and dusting when we met. She needed a little compassion. She needed a little tenderness. She needed a little Delia melody. So I've got some Ernie Ball regular slinky custom gauge nickel wound guitar strings made in the USA. These are absolutely not the type of string I prefer to use. I'm absolutely sure I'm going to get sponsored now, but these are what my roommate bought for their guitar, so they'll have to do. I am a DeXaeris girl myself. So these strings are identified by the gauge, which appears as a number on the outside of each envelope, moving from higher numbers being the thicker strings to lower numbers being the thinner strings. It's totally backwards with comparison to the way that I usually think of gauges, but that is just the way these are. The gauges are going to vary depending on whether you get medium or light strings or whatever, but this is our E string and it's nice and all coiled when we take it out, and we're just gonna uncoil it. We're gonna take this mustachio looking hunk of metal that is the tailpiece right here and thread the E string through with the curve of it facing out like this, as opposed to this way, which would be backwards. The bead on the string is going to get pulled and locked in right up in here, and that's what's going to keep the string on, and then the tension of all the strings is what's going to keep the bridge on the guitar. So what we're going to do now is take each of these strings in turn and just thread them through the stop bar just like we did with the low E string right there, which is the largest string. Just going to go in order here because there's no particular reason not to for this portion since we're just threading them through the stop bar here. So there's the A string, which is the second thickest string. There's D string, which is the third thickest string. The beloved by audiences everywhere G string, which in this gauge is the first string to not have wounds around the core. I don't know if wounds is the technical term or not for that, but if it were, it would be spelled like wounds, but pronounced wounds. I believe the proper word is actually coils, but I'm just going to keep calling them wounds. Look, Ma, I made up a word. So next we're going to get the B string right here. Here we go, right through here, just like that. And finally, the counterpart to the low E string, the high E string, the most likely string to break on the guitar, even though for some reason this one lost her G string first. And that just goes through the hole farthest to the right. That was so traumatic, it brought the envelope along with it. So now that we've got all the strings pulled through the stop bar, we're going to go ahead and take the stop bar and anchor it all nice and snug here on these little screw posts, which are useful for if you have to do an action job and make any adjustments on your guitar for intonation issues. We're going to take the strings and line them up all nice and properly in their respective string holders on this part of the bridge. I'm keeping my strings as taut as I can for the moment because I don't want them to come out of there if it goes slack, but they may do that if your strings go slack at any point while you're tuning. So, just keep an eye on it and make sure that while you're tuning it, it hasn't come off of there, like this and ended up over here, or God forbid, all the way over here. It's got to stay right in that center groove right there. Get this one seems to have slipped out.
That's what she said.
And just like we've got resting spots for each string on the bridge, we've also got a nice little nook for each string on the nut up here, which is this part at the top of the neck of the guitar. So make sure you rest each of your strings in their appropriate groove in the nut. My partner keeps laughing at the word nut because they're just super mature. Now I'm applying tension to these with my hands, but the truth of the matter is that it's impossible to get all of these strings to actually rest in the nut at the same time before you've actually started putting them through the pegs and winding them up to put some tension on them. So the main point is just keep whichever one you're working with at any given point in time in the groove it belongs in the nut right here, and just don't get them all tangled up or anything or set to the wrong tuning peg, because because that would be just absolutely horrible. So I'm going to start with the low E string, which is the thickest string. Some people start with the thinner string, some people start with the thicker string, some people are inconsistent about it because there is no real consistent singular school of thought on which of these is necessarily the correct method. I've got it all nice and tight here, and this is absolutely wrong. Okay, well maybe nice and tight is like a relative term here, but what I'm saying is this is still like pretty tight looking, and this is the wrong thing to do. You definitely want to leave a good bit of slack like this so that you can get a good few wounds around the peg right here on the headstock. I say wounds, the word I made up, even though the technical term is probably winds, but you know, whatever. So unfortunately, it is just sort of a trial and error process with each string to get like the right amount of slack, but you get better and better with it each time. Make sure when you're winding, like I said, you've got the string nice and set in the groove it goes in the nut, and that the groove in the saddle of the bridge is also nice and secure where it's supposed to be. And we're just going to go ahead and start winding this counterclockwise with the peg winder, and the reason that we're winding this counterclockwise is because it's going to cause the string to wrap its coils or its winds or whatever you want to call them around from the inside here up around like this, which is going to give you your proper setting and intonation. The string's not pulling through, which is good. That coil on the bottom there is a little bit loose, but that should fix itself in just a moment here. As you can see, it's getting tighter and tighter, and as it is, well, it's getting tighter. That's the whole point. So it gets to about this point right here. We've got two coils on here, and this is a little bit low, but you don't want to necessarily like wind it all the way up to pitch when you're winding it just now. You want to get like all the strings on there first and like keep them a little bit detuned until you're at that point. Also, obviously you do want to have a tuner when you're doing this. In this case, ours is built into our amplifier right here, which is a PV Viper 1. That's one of the nice nifty little extra bonus features of having this particular model. So next we're going to move on to the high E string, which is the thinnest little skinny string over on this side of the guitar over here, which is going to thread through the groove on the farthest side of the nut, obviously, and the lowest tuning peg on the opposite side of the headstock. Once again, make sure you've got some nice slack on that string when you're tuning it, but make sure that it sets into the groove while you're tuning it, as opposed to like flying off the side of the guitar or, heavens forbids, into like one of these other grooves over here. This one is definitely a little bit more difficult about wanting to actually loop, so you just kind of have to play with where you hold the tension in place on the string. I'm just going to go ahead and like manually pull it tight right there on the end of that loop, just to keep it from getting too crazy on us right there. So what I'm doing here with my thumb is I'm actually just sort of keeping a little bit of firm but gentle pressure applied on the string to keep it guided through the groove on the nut and keep the tension on it while keeping most of the slack ahead of the nut. So you may have noticed a pattern in the order that we're putting the strings on. We actually are just sort of like jumping back and forth across the bridge from lowest to highest to second lowest to second highest, and so on and so forth. There's only two other strings to put on past that. Make sure it's saddled properly in the bridge and all the way up the neck into this groove up here, but make sure it is not taut. Keep it loose, just like that. Right there. So in order to have enough slack to get your coils or wounds or winds or whatever you want to call them, you're going to need a little bit less of the end of each string left after the peg as you're moving towards the strings like closer to the center of the neck, just because the peg is a little bit further up the headstock. I feel like this is going to probably be as much as I need to get my 2 to 3 coils out of this one. So I'm going to just use my thumb to wrap it a little bit out of where it comes out of the peg. And as I wind the string, you can see I'm using my forefinger and my thumb on either side of the nut to keep tension applied properly, sort of keep the coil going up here once again, as opposed to looping, you know, way too loosely and just sort of flipping over itself, which would be really, really frustrating. Next, we're going to move on to the B string, and we're going to get our slack measured for that and put a little kink in it. Leave a little similar length as we did for the string on the opposite side of the guitar over there. Once again, as with every other string, we are rotating counterclockwise. It will always and forever be counterclockwise with every single string on this guitar. I promised I would use the string as an example if it kept misbehaving, and it is, so I definitely am. It's wanting to be a slippery little bastard, and the coils keep wanting to get loose on here and pop off of the peg, which I'm trying not to let it do, so I'm keeping the tension really sort of taut on the slack, as you can see right here. But in doing so, it's also like not wanting to line up on the saddle right here because it's so loose down here. So this is just an example of, you know, what I'm saying. You want to be constantly keeping an eye on the bridge saddle and doing whatever it takes, like, you know, I'm doing right here, to keep the slack as taut or as loose as it needs to be, and the tension just, you know, exactly right wherever it needs to be while you're winding the string, to make sure that everything rests exactly where it should be. It's not as hard as I'm making it sound, I promise. What's hard is like figuring out a way to describe it, to narrate a YouTube tutorial. Also, I feel like I'm totally getting like 4 or maybe even 5 wounds on this particular string right here. But on these higher strings, it's honestly hard to have like a such thing as too many coils. It's more a thing that I would concern myself with about the lower strings. On the thinner string, more winds are more likely to just sort of help keep it in place, whereas on a thicker string, too many winds can give you tuning difficulties if they're overlapping each other too much. And we're just going to do the same thing with the D string, and finally, the G string. Okay. So now that you've got all your strings on and the tension is relatively even across the neck, it's time to go ahead and grab your pick and your tuner. In our case, the PV Viper has a built-in tuner. All you have to do is press and hold the amplifier selection switch until all the lights go blank. Another reason you want to wait to tune your strings until you have them all on is because they actually will drop in pitch a little bit as the tension sets in on them. So tuning them up to this point would have just literally been pointless anyway. You always want to tune up to your note, and if you go past it, you want to like tune back down and like tune back up to it again. So I'm going to tune these in the order that I put them on, and different tuners are going to have different ways of telling you when you get to the note that you want. This one uses the red light on the knob on the right to let you know, whether you're low or high of what you're trying to hit, and then the red light on the right corresponds to the note that the letter represents right beside it. It's really simple once you're used to it. It looks complex at first, but once you hit the note, the lights should all turn green. Like that. And if you're tuning and you tune past it and you get like high of it like that, just like tune down and like tune down past it and tune back up to get to it, which helps make sure that your string stays in tune better. Bear in mind this first time tuning, it may take a little bit of patience for the string to actually finally like settle in once you've gotten it there, so just bear with it a little bit, and just, you know, as you're going back and forth across, just check to make sure that they haven't fallen out like this one has just a little bit, and of course they have, just, you know, pull it back up. At this point you can go ahead and take a pair of wire cutters and very carefully clip off the excess at the end of each string. Be very careful when you're doing this that you're only cutting off the excess end of the string that you're trying to cut off and not accidentally clipping, like, you know, part of the string that goes to the neck that you need to play, or like, you know, the string next door or something like that. And now our lovely lesbian battle axe of rock is ready to return to combat. As always, thank you so very much for watching, and until next time, be yourself, love yourself, play awesome badass lesbian battle axes, and be your most beautiful you.